The December wind howled through the gaps in Tom Anderson's workshop, carrying with it the promise of the worst blizzard Nebraska had seen in years. At 34, Tom had weathered plenty of storms, both meteorological and personal, but tonight felt different. The Weather Service had issued warnings all afternoon, and by 7 p.m., Main Street in Millbrook was already buried under 6 inches of fresh snow. Tom wiped his oil-stained hands on his coveralls and glanced at the old Chevy pickup he'd been working on. Mrs. Henderson needed it back by Friday, but with the storm rolling in, he figured she'd understand if he finished it tomorrow. The radiator repair could wait. Getting home safely couldn't. As he prepared to lock up Anderson's auto repair, the modest shop his father had built 40 years ago, Tom noticed headlights creeping slowly down the street. The vehicle, a sleek silver sedan completely out of place in their small farming community, seemed to be struggling against the mounting snow drifts. The car pulled into his lot with obvious difficulty, tires spinning briefly before finding purchase. Tom watched through the frosted window as an elegant woman emerged from the driver's seat. Even from a distance, he could see she was dressed for city life, not for a Nebraska blizzard. Her long coat looked expensive, her heels completely inappropriate for the weather, and she moved with the careful uncertainty of someone far from their element. Tom opened the workshop door, and the wind immediately tried to tear it from his hinges. "Ma'am," he called out over the storm's roar. "You all right out there?" The woman approached, her dark hair whipping around her face, snowflakes clinging to her eyelashes. Up close, Tom could see she was probably in her early 50s, with kind eyes that held a mixture of determination and worry. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she said, her voice cultured, with just a hint of an East Coast accent. "My GPS led me here, but I think I'm completely lost. I was trying to get to Lincoln, but with this storm..." She gestured helplessly at the swirling snow around them. "Lincoln's still 2 hours away in good weather," Tom replied, having to raise his voice over the wind. "In this, you're not making it tonight, that's for sure. Roads are already closing, and it's only going to get worse." The woman's face fell. "I have a very important meeting tomorrow morning. I have to get there." Tom studied her for a moment. There was something about her, beyond the obvious fact that she was out of place, that struck him as genuine. Despite her expensive clothes and polished appearance, there was vulnerability in her expression that reminded him of his own mother during the hardest times. "Look, ma'am, I don't mean to pry, but there's no hotel in Millbrook. The nearest one's in Gretna, and even that's probably unreachable tonight. You're welcome to wait the storm out at my place if you need to. It's not much, but it's warm and safe." The woman's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, I couldn't possibly impose." "It's not an imposition," Tom interrupted gently. "My grandmother always said helping strangers was just what decent people do. Plus, leaving you to freeze in your car isn't really an option." After a moment's hesitation, she extended a gloved hand. "Catherine Morrison, and I think I'd be very grateful for your kindness." "Tom Anderson, let me grab my things, and I'll follow you over. My place is just about half a mile down the road." As they made their way to their respective vehicles, Tom couldn't help but notice the woman, Catherine, moving with increasing difficulty through the deepening snow. Her sedan, clearly not designed for Nebraska winter conditions, barely managed the short drive to his small farmhouse. Tom's home was a modest 2-story structure his grandfather had built in the 1940s. The white paint was fading, and the front porch sagged slightly on one corner, but it was solid and warm. As they pulled into the gravel driveway, the motion sensor light revealed a property that, while well-maintained, spoke of someone living modestly. "Please, come in," Tom said, unlocking the front door and holding it open for Catherine. "I'll get the heat turned up." Catherine stepped into the small entryway, and Tom watched her take in her surroundings. The living room was simply furnished, a well-worn couch, his father's old recliner, a coffee table he'd built himself from reclaimed barn wood. Family photos lined the mantelpiece above a stone fireplace, and a small Christmas tree sat in the corner, decorated with handmade ornaments. "This is lovely," Catherine said, and Tom could tell she meant it. "So warm and authentic. Can I take your coat? I'll put some coffee on, or tea, if you prefer." As Catherine removed her coat, Tom noticed she was wearing what looked like a very expensive business suit. Everything about her spoke of wealth and success, from her understated jewelry to her perfectly styled hair. It made him acutely aware of his own appearance. Work boots, faded jeans, and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. "Coffee would be wonderful, thank you." While Tom busied himself in the small kitchen, Catherine wandered to the mantelpiece, studying the photographs. There were pictures of a younger Tom with his parents, graduation photos, and several images of him working on various cars and mechanical projects. "You've lived here long?" she asked when Tom returned with 2 steaming mugs. "All my life. Took over the auto shop when my dad retired 5 years ago. It's not glamorous work, but it's honest, and the people here are good folks." They settled on the couch, the storm raging outside the windows. In the warm glow of the living room lamps, Catherine seemed to relax for the first time since arriving. "I have to ask," Tom said carefully, "what brings someone like you to Nebraska in the middle of winter? If you don't mind me saying, you don't exactly look like you're from around here." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. When she looked up, there was something raw and honest in her expression. I'm trying to find something I lost a long time ago," she said finally. "Or maybe find something I never had to begin with. I know that probably sounds foolish." "Not foolish at all," Tom replied. "Sometimes we all need to take a step back and figure out what really matters." Outside, the wind rattled the windows, and the lights flickered briefly. Tom went to check the weather on his phone. "Storm's supposed to keep up all night," he reported. "You're definitely stuck here until morning, I'm afraid. I've got a spare bedroom upstairs. It's nothing fancy, but the bed's comfortable." "Tom, I can't thank you enough for this. In my world, people don't often—" She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "People don't often help without expecting something in return. Well, in my world, we help because it's the right thing to do." As the evening progressed, they found themselves talking easily. Tom shared stories about growing up in Millbrook, about taking over the family business, about the challenges of keeping a small auto shop profitable in an era of chain stores and online everything. Catherine, more guardedly, spoke about her work, her travels, and the increasing isolation she felt despite being surrounded by people every day. "I used to think success was about accumulating things," she said as they sat by the fireplace Tom had built up against the cold. "Money, property, influence. But lately, I wonder if I've been measuring the wrong things entirely." "What made you think that?" Catherine was quiet for a moment. "I have everything I thought I wanted, but I realized recently that I don't have anyone to share it with who actually knows who I am." "Not really." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "I may not have much, but I know who I am and what matters to me. That's something, I guess." "That's everything," Catherine said softly. As the night wore on and the storm continued its assault on the small house, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was somehow significant, not just for Catherine, but for himself as well. There was something about her that went beyond her obvious sophistication and wealth. She seemed genuinely interested in his life, his stories, his perspective on things. It had been a long time since anyone had listened to him that way. When they finally said goodnight and Tom showed Catherine to the spare bedroom, he lay awake in his own room listening to the wind and thinking about the strange turn his evening had taken. He had no idea that upstairs, Catherine Morrison, CEO of Morrison Agricultural Holdings, one of the largest farming conglomerates in the Midwest, was lying awake as well, thinking about kindness, about authenticity, and about the kind of life that seemed as foreign to her as her world would be to Tom. Neither of them could have imagined what the morning would bring. Tom woke to the kind of profound silence that only comes after a major snowstorm. Sunlight streamed through his bedroom windows, illuminating a world transformed overnight. Where yesterday there had been brown winter fields and familiar roads, now there was an unbroken expanse of white, pristine and beautiful, but also completely impassable. He checked his phone. 3 feet of snow had fallen, with drifts reaching up to 5 feet in some areas. The state highway department wouldn't have the secondary roads cleared for at least another day, maybe 2. He padded downstairs in his slippers and found Catherine already awake, standing at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee, still wearing the clothes from yesterday. "Morning," Tom said, running a hand through his hair. "I hope you slept okay. I should have thought to offer you something more comfortable to wear." Catherine turned, and Tom was struck by how different she looked in the morning light. Without her careful composure from the night before, she seemed younger somehow, more vulnerable. There were worry lines around her eyes that he hadn't noticed in the dim lighting. "I slept better than I have in months, actually. Your guest room is lovely. And don't worry about clothes. I've survived in worse conditions." She paused, then added with a rueful smile, "Though I admit my track record with Nebraska winters is pretty limited." Tom poured himself coffee and joined her at the window. "Well, I've got some good news and some bad news. The bad news is we're completely snowed in. The good news is..." He gestured at the breathtaking landscape outside. Well, look at that. The morning sun had turned the snow into a field of diamonds. Tom's modest property, which included a small barn, a chicken coop, and about 3 acres of land, looked like something from a Christmas card. In the distance, the shapes of other farms were visible as dark clusters of buildings rising from the white expanse. "It's beautiful," Catherine said softly. "I'd forgotten places like this existed. You hungry? I'll make a pretty decent breakfast. It's the least I can do since you're stuck here for another day or so." As Tom cooked eggs and bacon, Catherine continued to study the view outside. "Tom, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. Are you happy? I mean, really happy with your life here?" Tom considered the question as he flipped the eggs. It wasn't something people asked him very often. "Most days, yeah. I mean, money's always tight, and sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd taken that job offer in Denver a few years back. But this place, it's home. The work means something. When I fix Mrs. Henderson's truck, I know it matters to her. When I help young Jake Peters get his first car running, I know I'm maybe changing his life a little bit." He plated the food and brought it to his small kitchen table. "Why do you ask?" Catherine sat down across from him. "Because last night was the first time in years, maybe decades, that I've had a conversation where I didn't have to think about angles or agendas or what the other person wanted from me. You helped me simply because I needed help. You shared your home and your food because it was the right thing to do. I'd forgotten people like you existed." There was something in her tone that made Tom look up from his breakfast. "Catherine, what exactly do you do for work?" She was quiet for a long moment, then let out a long breath. "I run a company. A large company. We buy agricultural properties, consolidate them, and operate them as large-scale farming operations." Tom felt something cold settle in his stomach. "How large?" "We currently own and operate about 400,000 acres across 7 states, including about 85,000 acres here in Nebraska." Tom set down his fork. In farming communities, there were certain names that everyone knew, usually not for good reason. Companies that came in and bought up family farms, consolidated them into massive operations, and changed entire communities in the process. Morrison Agricultural Holdings? Yes. Tom leaned back in his chair, trying to process this information. Catherine Morrison wasn't just wealthy. She was one of the most powerful people in Midwest agriculture. Her company's practices were controversial, to put it mildly. Many small farmers saw operations like hers as a direct threat to their way of life. "You're Catherine Morrison." "The Catherine Morrison." "I am." "Jesus, Catherine, do you know what your company represents to people like me? To communities like this one?" Catherine's face tightened, but she didn't look away. "I know what people think about what we do, and I know that some of that criticism is deserved. But I also know that modern agriculture requires scale and efficiency that small operations often can't provide." "Scale and efficiency," Tom repeated, his voice flat. "That's what you call putting the Peterson family out of business last year? That's what you call buying up half the good farmland in the county?" "Tom, you don't understand the complexities." "I understand plenty," Tom interrupted, his voice rising. "I understand that families who've been farming for generations are losing their land because they can't compete with companies like yours. I understand that you're killing small communities by concentrating everything into massive operations." They sat in tense silence for several minutes. Finally, Catherine spoke, her voice much quieter than before. "You're right about some of it, but there's more to the story than you know." "Then tell me." Catherine stood and walked back to the window, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. "My grandfather was a farmer. A small farmer, just like the ones you're defending. He worked 160 acres in Iowa, raised 5 children, and died young from the stress of trying to make ends meet year after year. My father inherited that farm and lost it when I was 12. We had to move to the city, and he worked factory jobs for the rest of his life, bitter and broken." She turned back to face Tom. "I built Morrison Agricultural Holdings because I thought I could create a system that was more stable, more secure. I thought if I could bring efficiency and modern business practices to farming, I could prevent other families from going through what mine did. By putting other families out of business? By offering them something better." "Tom, do you know how many of our operations are run by former family farmers? How many people we employ who might otherwise have lost everything?" Tom shook his head. "You can dress it up however you want, Catherine, but you're still part of the problem. You're still taking something beautiful and personal and turning it into just another corporate operation. And you're still stuck in the past, thinking that struggling and failing somehow makes farming more noble than succeeding." The words hung between them like a challenge. Tom felt his anger flare, but beneath it was something else, disappointment. For a few hours, he genuinely liked this woman. He'd felt a connection that went beyond their obvious differences. Now he felt foolish for thinking they could understand each other. I think maybe we should just get through today, Tom said finally. Once the roads are clear, you can go back to your world, and I'll stay in mine. Catherine nodded stiffly. That's probably for the best. But as the day progressed, neither of them could quite maintain their anger. The house was small enough that they couldn't avoid each other entirely, and the enforced proximity gradually wore down their defenses. Tom found himself watching Catherine when she thought he wasn't looking, noticing the way she studied his bookshelf, the questions she asked about the family photos, the careful way she handled his grandmother's china when she insisted on washing the dishes. For her part, Catherine seemed genuinely interested in the details of his life, how he'd learned his trade, what challenges he faced in running a small business, what he loved about working with his hands. Despite himself, Tom found his hostility beginning to soften. By afternoon, they were talking again, carefully at first, then with growing honesty. Catherine admitted that she often felt isolated by her success, that she questioned many of the decisions her company had made, that she struggled with the contradiction between her original intentions and the reality of what Morrison Agricultural Holdings had become. I keep telling myself that we're providing stability and efficiency, she said as they sat in Tom's living room, watching the snow continue to fall outside. But lately, I wonder if we're just destroying something irreplaceable in the name of progress. Then why don't you change course? Because it's not that simple. I have shareholders, board members, employees, thousands of people depending on the company's success. I can't just decide one day to operate differently, can't you? I mean, you're the CEO, right? Catherine laughed, but there was no humor in it. Being the CEO of a major corporation isn't like running an auto shop, Tom. Every decision affects thousands of people and millions of dollars. The margin for error is essentially zero, but you're still miserable. I'm successful. That's not the same thing. That evening, as they shared another simple meal in Tom's kitchen, Catherine asked about his dreams, his plans for the future. Tom found himself talking about ideas he'd never shared with anyone. His hope to maybe expand the shop, to start offering restoration services for classic cars, to build something that could employ a few other people from the community. The problem is capital, he admitted. To really do it right, I'd need land for a bigger workshop, maybe even a small showroom. But land around here, well, it's getting more expensive every year. Companies like yours buying up everything that comes on the market. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Tom, there's something I need to tell you about why I was coming to Lincoln. Okay, I was going to attend a board meeting where we were going to finalize the purchase of the Hendrickson farm. You probably know it, about 300 acres just outside town, beautiful property with some of the best soil in the county. Tom's stomach dropped. Old man Hendrickson died last month. His kids live out of state and want to sell. Yes, we were going to offer them significantly above market value, convert it to row crops, and fold it into our regional operation. Of course you were. But sitting here, talking to you, seeing what we're really taking away. Catherine paused, then looked directly at Tom. What if there was another option? What if instead of Morrison Agricultural Holdings buying that property, someone else did? Someone who understood its real value. Catherine, what are you talking about? I'm talking about 300 acres of prime farmland, including a beautiful old farmhouse and several outbuildings. I'm talking about enough space for someone to build exactly the kind of auto shop and restoration business they've been dreaming about. Tom stared at her. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. The room fell silent except for the quiet ticking of Tom's grandfather's clock on the mantelpiece. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside, something fundamental had shifted between them. Tom didn't sleep much that night. Upstairs, Catherine Morrison lay awake as well, staring at the ceiling and wondering if she was about to make the biggest mistake of her career, or the first truly meaningful decision she'd made in years. Tom was awake before dawn, sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. He'd spent most of the night turning Catherine's proposition over in his mind, trying to understand her motives, trying to believe it was real. 300 acres. The Hendrickson farm. It was worth easily $2 million, probably more. The sound of footsteps on the stairs told him Catherine was awake too. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that made her look younger and more approachable than she had when she'd first arrived. You couldn't sleep either? She asked. Not really. Tom gestured to the chair across from him. Catherine, I've been thinking about what you said last night. About the farm. I need to understand. Why would you do something like that? What's in it for you? Catherine poured herself coffee and sat down. In the early morning light, Tom could see the fatigue in her face, but also something else. A kind of resolve he hadn't seen before. Honestly, I don't know what's in it for me. At least not in any traditional business sense. But I know what continuing down the path I'm on will cost me, and I'm not sure I can afford that price anymore. I don't understand. Catherine was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Tom, can I tell you about my daughter? The question caught Tom off guard. Catherine hadn't mentioned having children. I have a daughter, Rebecca. She's 28, lives in California, works for a tech company. We used to be close when she was younger, but as Morrison Agricultural Holdings grew, as I became more consumed with building the business, Catherine's voice trailed off. A few years ago, she told me that she was proud of what I'd accomplished, but that she felt like she didn't know who I was anymore. She said I'd become so focused on winning that I'd forgotten what I was fighting for. When was the last time you talked to her? Christmas. She called to say hello. We talked for maybe 10 minutes about surface things, and then she had to go. I used to know everything about her life. Now I know practically nothing. Tom waited, sensing there was more. Last month, Rebecca called me. She was crying, which she never does. She'd just been diagnosed with a serious condition. She's going to be okay, but it's going to require surgery and a long recovery. And as I listened to her trying to explain what was happening, trying to be strong, I realized that my own daughter didn't feel like she could lean on me when she needed support most. Catherine's voice broke slightly. She has friends, people she works with, who know her better than I do, who can offer her more comfort and genuine care than her own mother. I've been so busy building an empire that I forgot to build relationships with the people who actually matter. Tom felt something shift in his chest. I'm sorry, Catherine. That must have been difficult to hear. It was a wake-up call. I've spent 20 years telling myself that everything I was doing was for Rebecca's future, for her security. But what good is financial security if you don't have anyone to share your life with? They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. Finally, Tom spoke. That still doesn't explain why you'd want to buy me a farm. Catherine smiled, and for the first time since he'd known her, it reached her eyes completely. Because last night was the first time in years that I had a real conversation with someone. Because you offered shelter to a stranger without expecting anything in return. Because when you talk about your work, about this community, I can hear genuine passion and purpose. She paused, then continued. And because I think maybe if I can help someone build something meaningful instead of just buying up everything that exists, I might remember what that feels like myself. Tom shook his head. Catherine, I can't let you spend $2 million on me just because you're having a personal crisis. It's not charity, Tom. It's an investment. In what? In the possibility that there's still room in this world for people who do things because they're right, not because they're profitable. In the idea that communities matter more than efficiency. In the hope that I can still make choices that my daughter would be proud of. Before Tom could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Jake Peters, one of the young men from town whose car Tom had helped repair. Tom? Hey, I'm sorry to call so early, but I wanted to make sure you were okay after the storm. Me and a few of the guys are going to start digging out some of the older folks in town, and we wanted to check on you too. I'm fine, Jake, thanks. Actually, I've got a friend here who got caught in the storm. We're both doing okay. Good to hear. Hey, listen, if you need anything, you let us know. Mrs. Henderson is worried about her truck. She's got a doctor's appointment in Omaha tomorrow if the roads get cleared. After Tom hung up, Catherine was looking at him with curiosity. Jake Peters, Tom explained. Kid's maybe 22, works at the grain elevator. I helped him get his first car running when he was in high school, taught him some basic maintenance. Now he looks out for people in the community, especially after storms like this. He learned that from you. He learned it from growing up here. People looking out for each other. That's just how small towns work. Not all small towns. And not all people. Catherine stood and walked to the window. The morning sun was brilliant on the snow, and in the distance, they could see figures moving between houses, people checking on neighbors, clearing driveways for elderly residents. Tom, what you have here, this sense of community, of purpose, it's precious. And it's disappearing. I know. Companies like mine are part of the reason why. Every family farm we buy, every small operation we consolidate, we're taking away a piece of what makes places like this special. Tom joined her at the window. So what are you saying? I'm saying maybe it's time I tried to give something back instead of just taking. I'm saying maybe the best investment I could make isn't in more land or more equipment, but in helping someone build the kind of life I've forgotten how to live." They were interrupted by the sound of an engine outside. Tom looked out to see a county snowplow making its way down the road, clearing a path wide enough for regular vehicles to pass. "Looks like you'll be able to get to Lincoln today after all," Tom said. "Yes," Catherine replied, but she didn't sound particularly enthusiastic about the prospect. An hour later, Catherine's rental car was loaded with her things, and Tom had cleared enough snow from his driveway for her to get back to the road. They stood beside her car, the morning sun warm on their faces despite the cold air. "Catherine, I want you to know that these 2 days, they've meant something to me too. I haven't talked to anyone like this in a long time." "Tom, I meant what I said about the farm. I'm going to miss my board meeting this morning, but I'll be calling my lawyers this afternoon. If you're willing, I'd like to make an offer on the Hendrickson property and then transfer it to you." Tom felt overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now, but I want you to think about it. Think about what you could build there, what it could mean for this community. Think about young people like Jake Peters having a reason to stay instead of leaving for the cities." Catherine reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. On the back, she wrote her personal cell phone number. "Call me when you've had time to think. And Tom, whatever you decide, I want you to know that meeting you has changed something for me. You've reminded me of who I used to be and who I might still be able to become." She got into her car, then rolled down the window. "Oh, and Tom, when I get back to the office, I'm going to be making some changes to how Morrison Agricultural Holdings operates. It's going to take time, but I think my daughter would approve." As Catherine drove away, Tom stood in his driveway holding her business card, watching her car disappear into the distance. The sun was bright, the snow was already beginning to melt in places, and everything around him looked exactly the same as it had 3 days ago. But Tom Anderson knew that nothing would ever be quite the same again. That afternoon, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Catherine's number. "Tom, it's Catherine. I wanted you to know, I just made an offer on the Hendrickson farm. Cash offer, above asking price, with a stipulation that the deal closes within 2 weeks. Catherine, the offer's been accepted. My lawyers are drawing up papers to transfer the property to you immediately upon closing. No strings attached, no conditions. It's yours if you want it." Tom sat down heavily on his couch. "Why are you doing this?" "Because yesterday morning, I woke up in a stranger's house and realized I was happier than I'd been in years. Because for the first time in decades, I met someone who reminded me that there are still good people doing good work in the world. And because I think my daughter would be proud of me for this decision." "Catherine, you don't have to decide right now, but the opportunity will be there when you're ready. Take care of yourself, Tom. And thank you for reminding me what kindness looks like." After she hung up, Tom sat in his living room for a long time, staring at the business card, thinking about 300 acres of prime farmland, about possibilities he'd never dared to imagine, and about a woman who had shown him that sometimes the most important changes happen not because of what we plan, but because of what we're willing to receive. 3 months later, Tom Anderson stood in the main barn of what had once been the Hendrickson farm, now officially his property, watching Jake Peters and 2 other young men from town install the hydraulic lift that would be the centerpiece of his expanded auto shop. The March air was crisp but warm, carrying the promise of spring and new growth. The transformation had been remarkable. What Catherine had made possible in a single moment of generosity, Tom had spent the intervening months carefully planning and executing. The old barn had been converted into a state-of-the-art automotive facility, with space for restoration work, general repairs, and even a small showroom area where customers could wait comfortably. But more than the physical improvements, Tom was most proud of what the expansion meant for his community. Jake Peters was now his full-time assistant, learning the trade properly instead of just picking up odd jobs around town. Sarah Henderson, Mrs. Henderson's granddaughter who had just graduated from technical college, was starting as his bookkeeper and business manager. 2 other young people from Millbrook had inquired about apprenticeships. "Tom," Jake called from across the barn. "Mrs. Morrison's here." Tom looked up to see Catherine walking through the main door, and he had to smile at how different she looked from that first night. Instead of her expensive business suit, she wore jeans, boots, and a simple sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she moved with the easy confidence of someone who belonged rather than someone who was visiting. "Catherine," Tom said, walking over to greet her. "Right on time. Ready for the grand tour? I've been looking forward to this for weeks." Over the past 3 months, Tom and Catherine had stayed in regular contact. Their conversations had evolved from the initial awkwardness around her extraordinary gift to genuine friendship. Catherine had become a kind of informal advisor as Tom planned his expansion, offering business insights while respecting his vision for keeping the operation community-focused rather than purely profit-driven. Tom led her through the facility, explaining the different work areas, the equipment, the plans for future growth. Catherine listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions, and clearly impressed by the thoughtful way Tom had approached every aspect of the expansion. The best part, Tom said as they concluded the tour in his small office, is that we're not just fixing cars anymore. We're creating opportunities for people to stay in Millbrook, to build careers here instead of having to leave for the cities. That's exactly what I hoped would happen, Catherine said. Tom, there's something I want to tell you. Something I've been working on since we first met. Okay. Catherine sat down across from Tom's desk, her expression serious but excited. Morrison Agricultural Holdings has been making some significant changes. We've started a new program where instead of just buying up family farms, we offer partnership arrangements. Existing farmers can maintain ownership of their land while gaining access to our resources, technology, and distribution networks. Tom raised his eyebrows. That's a pretty dramatic shift. It is. And it's been met with resistance from some of our board members and shareholders. But it's also been incredibly successful where we've implemented it. Farmers are more productive, more profitable, and more sustainable. Communities are stronger. And honestly, it's more profitable for us in the long run too. What changed your mind about the old approach? Catherine smiled. A conversation with my daughter. I called Rebecca right after I left your place that day and told her everything that had happened. About getting stuck in the storm, about staying with you, about the farm. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, Mom, that's the first story you've told me in years where you sound like yourself. How is Rebecca doing? With her health, I mean. Much better. The surgery went well, and she's almost fully recovered. But more than that, we're rebuilding our relationship. I fly out to see her once a month, and we talk on the phone every week. Real conversations, not just updates about work or logistics. I'm glad to hear that. She wants to meet you, actually. I've told her so much about you and what you've built here. She's thinking about taking some time off work to travel, maybe spend a few weeks in small-town America. She says she wants to understand what I found here. Tom was touched by the idea. She'd be welcome anytime. They were interrupted by a knock on the office door. Jake Peters stuck his head in. Sorry to interrupt, Tom, but Mrs. Henderson is here with her truck. She says it's making that noise again. Tell her I'll be right out. Tom turned back to Catherine. The glamorous life of a small-town mechanic. Actually, Tom, there's one more thing I wanted to discuss with you. A proposition, if you're interested. I'm listening. We're planning to establish a series of community workshops around the Midwest, places where we can offer technical training, business development support, that sort of thing. We want to help rural communities develop the skills and resources they need to thrive rather than just survive. Tom was intrigued. What would that look like? Well, we'd need partners in each community. People who understand the local needs and have the respect of their neighbors. People who could help us make sure we're actually providing value rather than just imposing our ideas from the outside. You want me to be a partner? I want you to help us design the program. Your expansion here could be a model for what's possible. We could bring in experts to teach everything from advanced automotive technology to small business management to sustainable farming practices. Young people could learn trades that would let them stay in their communities instead of leaving. Tom leaned back in his chair, considering the possibilities. It would have to be done right, not as some corporate initiative that looks good in annual reports, but as something that actually serves the communities. Absolutely. That's why I need someone like you involved. Someone who understands what these places need and what they value. Before Tom could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. Tom Anderson. Mr. Anderson? This is David Hendrickson, Jim Hendrickson's son. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. Tom felt a moment of anxiety. The Hendrickson children had been surprisingly gracious about the sale of their father's farm, but he'd worried that they might have second thoughts. Not at all, David. What can I do for you? Well, sir, I wanted to call and thank you. My sister and I have been hearing from folks in town about what you're doing with Dad's place, how you're creating jobs and opportunities for young people. It's exactly what Dad would have wanted to see happen to the farm. Tom felt a wave of relief. That means a lot to hear, David. Your father was a good man. He was. And he always believed that land was meant to be used for building communities, not just making money. what you're doing there. It's honoring his memory in the best possible way. After Tom hung up, he found Catherine watching him with an expression of quiet satisfaction. Good news? She asked. The best kind. Tom paused, then made a decision. Catherine, about your community workshop program, I'm interested. More than interested. I think it could be something really special. Really? Really? But I have some conditions. Name them. First, the communities have to have real input into what gets offered and how it gets delivered. This can't be about imposing solutions from the outside. Agreed. Second, any program we develop has to be sustainable for the long term. Not just something that exists as long as Morrison Agricultural Holdings is interested in funding it. That makes perfect sense. And third, Tom said, his voice growing more serious, we need to make sure that what we're building actually helps people stay connected to each other and to their communities. The moment it becomes just another way to turn people into more efficient economic units. I'm out. Catherine extended her hand across the desk. Deal. As they shook hands, Tom felt the same sense of possibility he'd experienced that first morning after the storm. But this time, it wasn't just about his own future. It was about the potential to help other people, other communities, find ways to thrive while maintaining the things that made them special. 6 months later, Tom stood in the same barn, but now it was filled with people. The first Community Skills Workshop was in full swing, with 25 participants from across the region learning everything from small engine repair to business planning to sustainable agriculture techniques. Catherine was there, working alongside participants and clearly enjoying the hands-on environment. Rebecca Morrison had come too, and Tom was charmed by how much she resembled her mother, not just physically, but in her curiosity, her thoughtfulness, and her genuine interest in understanding how communities worked. She was documenting the workshop for a blog series about rural innovation, but Tom could tell she was also simply enjoying the experience of being in a place where people knew each other's names and stories. Tom, Catherine said, approaching him during a break in the afternoon sessions, I have something for you. She handed him an envelope, thick and official-looking. What's this? A progress report. The Community Workshop program has been so successful that Morrison Agricultural Holdings Board of Directors has approved a major expansion. We're going to be establishing 25 workshops across 7 states over the next 3 years. Tom opened the envelope and found himself looking at financial projections, expansion plans, and a formal partnership agreement that would make him the regional coordinator for the entire program. Catherine, this is incredible. It's what you've earned. Tom, in less than a year, you've proven that it's possible to build something that's profitable and sustainable while actually strengthening communities rather than extracting from them. The board is convinced because the results speak for themselves. Tom looked around the barn at the workshop participants, farmers learning new techniques, young people discovering career possibilities, small business owners networking and sharing ideas. In the far corner, Jake Peters was teaching a group of teenagers how to change oil, passing on skills the same way Tom had taught him. You know what the best part is? Tom said. What? 6 months ago, most of these people didn't know each other, even though they live within 50 miles of each other. Now they're forming partnerships, sharing resources, supporting each other's businesses. We're not just teaching skills. We're rebuilding the connections that make communities strong. Catherine smiled. That's exactly what I hoped would happen when I first met you. When you first got lost in a snowstorm, you mean? I wasn't lost, Tom. I was exactly where I needed to be. As the afternoon session resumed and the barn filled again with the sounds of learning and collaboration, Tom reflected on the improbable journey that had brought him to this moment. A simple act of kindness during a winter storm had grown into something neither he nor Catherine could have imagined. Not just a successful business expansion, but a model for how people could work together to build the kinds of communities where everyone could thrive. Outside, spring was turning towards summer, and the 300 acres that had once been the Hendrickson farm were alive with possibility. In the renovated farmhouse, Rebecca Morrison was interviewing local participants about their experiences. In the fields, experimental plots demonstrated sustainable farming techniques that preserved soil health while maintaining productivity. And in the barn that had become the heart of it all, people were learning not just new skills, but new ways of thinking about what was possible when communities came together around shared values and mutual support. Tom Anderson had offered shelter to a stranger, and in return, he'd received not just a farm, but a future he never could have imagined, one where success was measured not in dollars accumulated, but in opportunities created, relationships built, and communities strengthened. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the workshop was closed and the fields were peaceful, Tom would think about that snowy December night and realize that the greatest storms sometimes bring the most unexpected gifts.